From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. U.S. National Guard deploys to support overwhelmed hospitals. Putin says effective dialogue with U.S. is possible. Only 6% of Republicans said Biden is definitely the rightful winner. Marines kick out 206 troops for refusing COVID-19 vaccine. Iran announces new space launch amid nuclear talks. And our top story tonight. Members of the U.S. National Guard have been deployed to help support overwhelmed staff at the UMass Medical Center in Massachusetts and 54 other hospitals. This comes amidst a rise in COVID and non-COVID cases as hospitals struggle with a shortage of staff. Soldiers and airmen and airwomen are working in non-clinical roles, including transporting patients, security, collecting test samples, and patient observation.
What we're experiencing right now is unprecedented volume of patients that are coming through our doors. It's a combination of both COVID patients and non-COVID patients. On top of that, staffing is becoming an issue because a lot of our caregivers are becoming ill and they're out either taking care of themselves or taking care of family members. So it's put an additional strain on our caregivers here within our organization. So we've requested the assistance of the National Guard to come in and help.
Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday told U.S. President Joe Biden he is convinced effective dialogue between Moscow and Washington is possible. His comments came hours ahead of telephone talks as tensions rise between the two countries over the issue of Ukraine. Putin and Biden will conduct their second phone call in less than a month in an effort to diffuse tensions around Moscow's military buildup on the Ukrainian border. This comes ahead of talks between Russia and the U.S. in Geneva on January 10th. Civil rights groups on Thursday filed a federal lawsuit against Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, in a bid to block new GOP-drawn legislative district maps. They allege that the maps violate the Voting Rights Act and disenfranchise Black voters. The suit was filed in the U.S. District Court in Atlanta by the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU of Georgia, and Wilmer Hale on behalf of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Incorporated. The 6th District of African Methodist Episcopal Church and Georgia voters are also plaintiffs. Sophia Lynn Lakin, Deputy Director of ACLU's Voting Rights Project, said that the maps are a brazen attempt to undermine the political power of Black voters. Nearly 3/4 of Republicans doubt President Joe Biden's 2020 electoral victory was legitimate, according to a new poll from University of Massachusetts at Amherst. 71% of GOP respondents said they don't believe Biden was rightfully elected. 25% of Republicans said Biden's win was probably not legitimate, while 46% said it was definitely not legitimate, as per the poll. Only 6% of the Republicans polled said that Biden is the rightful winner, while 15% said he probably is. Most Americans, that is 58%, believe Biden's election was legitimate. That includes 91% of Democrats and 54% of independents. The U.S. Marine Corps on Thursday said it has dismissed more Marines for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine. The total number of discharges has risen to 206, up from 169 last week. President Joe Biden on Monday signed into law the fiscal 2022 National Defense Authorization Act. It says the military services cannot dishonorably discharge members for vaccine refusal. The discharges must be either honorable or general under honorable conditions. Overall, 95% of active duty Marines and 86% of reservists have received the first vaccine dose. The service has received over 3,000 requests for religious accommodation, of which 0 have been approved. The Marine Corps has over 1,000 administrative or medical exemptions. Thousands of Sudanese demonstrators joined protests Thursday against the army's October 25th coup. The AFP reports that they braved tear gas, communication disruptions, and a tight lockdown in the capital, Khartoum. Demonstrators reached within 100 yards of the presidential palace there, headquarters of Military Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Troops, police, and paramilitary units launched multiple tear gas canisters into the crowd. Activists are calling for transition to civilian rule. Similar anti-coup protests have been reported in Madani, south of the capital, and the cities of Kassala and Port Sudan in the east. At least 48 people have died in protest-related violence, according to the Independent Doctors Committee. The number of Palestinians sentenced to life imprisonment by Israeli authorities has surged to 547, a Palestinian rights group working on prisoners' affairs said Thursday. The Palestinian Prisoners Society said that the number was reached after Yusuf Zahur was sentenced Wednesday to life in prison by an Israeli military court. The decision against 24-year-old Zahur included an additional 15 years in prison and a fine of about $483,000, according to the group. Zahur, a native of Hebron in the southern West Bank, is the third prisoner to be sentenced to life in December. The other two were Qasim Asafra and Nasser Asafra, both from the same city. All three had their homes demolished by Israeli forces. Hundreds of Palestinians gathered in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank Thursday to celebrate the 57th anniversary of the foundation of the Fatah movement. Fatah supporters and representatives of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, attended the celebrations carrying flags and chanting slogans. The late Palestinian National Authority President Yasser Arafat founded the Fatah movement in January 1st, 1965. Its goal is building an independent Arab state on Palestinian lands. Arafat later became chairman of the PLO in 1969. The PLO had been created by the Arab League 5 years earlier to declare Palestinian independence. Iran on Thursday announced it had carried out a new space launch, a move likely to irk Western powers amid talks on reviving a 2015 nuclear deal. The Simorgh satellite launcher carried 3 research cargoes into space, Defense Ministry spokesman Ahmed Husseini said. In February, Iran announced a successful test of its most powerful solid-fuel satellite launcher to date. The Zuljana can put an 1,100-pound payload into orbit. The United States voiced concern about that launch, saying that the test could boost Iran's ballistic missile technology. Iran successfully put its first military satellite into orbit in April of 2020. A bill proposed by Republican Oklahoma State Senator would allow parents to have books that discuss gender identity removed from public school libraries. Rights activists warned the measure could have life-threatening consequences for LGBTQ+ children statewide. Under Senate Bill 1142, only one parent would have to object to a book that includes discussion of sexual perversion, sex-based classification, sexual identity, or gender identity. That begins the process of removal. Upon receiving a written request to remove a book, a school district would have 30 days to eliminate all copies of the material from circulation. Global warming caused by human activity could heat oceans enough to fuel hurricanes and tropical storms, a study published Wednesday projects. It's an underestimated risk of climate change, said Joshua Studholme of Yale University, the study's lead author. Studholme said that the research predicts that 21st century's tropical cyclones likely will occur over a wider range of latitudes. That means storms such as Tropical Storm Henry, which battered New England in August, and Subtropical Storm Alpha, which hit Portugal in September, could be signs of a new normal. Tropical cyclones, also known as hurricanes and typhoons, generally form at low latitudes with access to warm waters of tropical oceans. Coming up next, after the break, is our in-depth analysis segment on Mother Teresa's charity. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
The future of Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity in India hangs in the balance after the Indian government announced it would not renew permission for it to access foreign funding during Christmas season. There were more than 300 attacks on Christian community in the first 9 months of 2021, according to a recent report compiled by a group of Christian non-governmental organizations. There are more than 20 million Christians in India, making up less than 3% of the nearly 1.4 billion population, according to the 2011 census data. More than 15 attacks on Christians on Christmas Day alone. India is home to the second largest Catholic population in Asia after the Philippines. Now, Mother Teresa's charity has more than 5,000 nuns worldwide in 120 countries, and the charity provides education, medical care, social assistance to the poor. So to discuss this development and more, we have with us Father Thomas Palitanam, who is a human rights activist associated with movements of the landless poor and forming thrift groups amongst the women folk for self-empowerment. Thank you for being here, Father Thomas.
Welcome.
So let's dig right into this. Why do you think that the Modi government has pulled this move during Christmas season?
Well, I guess it is quite obvious, but it would be wrong to say that it was just only the Mother Teresa's Sisters organization that has been denied. It's part of the whole process of verification and control over NGOs working in India, both on social issues and on philanthropic issues, that they do not go against the government's wishes. So the denial of the FCRA registration or renewing it for Mother Teresa's is part of a whole process that is taking place in India right now.
And so has this affected other organizations?
Yes. See, you must understand that these FCR regulations came into vogue in 1976, so way back already. And in 2010, there was a new act, and then there was again amendment in 2020. Already by 2017, we have had nearly 11,000 organizations who had been denied or denied renewal of their FCRA. And the Solicitor General reporting to the court said that 19,000 accounts have been denied renewal of the FCRA. But that would be a consolidation of all the numbers that all the organizations that have been denied FCRA renewal since 2011. Right now, 22,000 odd organizations have applied for renewal, and the grapevine from within says that less than 5,000, around 5,000 only, have right now been processed. So if you look at the Ministry of Home Affairs website, looking at the status of the renewal of FCRA, you will find there in process, denied, refused, or 4 categories, or granted, and most are now pending, in the process. So Mother Teresa's organization's denial is part of a whole tranche of organizations for whom FCRA has been denied.
So let's look particularly at this charity. What type of work did the charity do? And they've been accused of forcing conversions. Would you agree to this assessment?
Absolutely a lie. And that is evident for everybody. Of course, as recently as last month, the organization in Baroda, earlier now Vadodara, there has been allegation that the sisters had given to the inmates rosary to be held in hand and have asked them to say the Christian prayers, which of course are really fallacious, to be laughed at. I've been closely associated with the organization as a young priest when working in Vijayawada. I've been constantly going there to minister to the inmates, and never had been any case registered or seen where they have forcibly or converted even people who were admitted to the organization. So it is just a falsehood that's being spread, not only with regard to Mother Teresa's organization, but all organizations working especially with the poorest of the poor.
Definitely. Now, have you seen any Hindu organizations condemning this?
Interestingly, if you have listened to the news emanating from India, there was the Sansad of the in the north, where hate speeches were made in public asking for the pogrom against Muslims, Christians, absolute callous and statements without any fear of what the state could do, because they're quite confident that the state governments, especially in UP in the north, will not act against the hate speech by the Hindu spiritual leaders. But fortunately, and a sense of a hope that is given, that's emanating, is that there have been also leaders, Hindu religious leaders, who have condemned that speech made by that Sansad that took place last week. Not only, we also seen the courageous stand one of the spiritual leaders who walked out of a meeting when hate speeches were hurled against the minorities. That's something very redeeming.
And what about here in the United States? Aside from Hindus for Human Rights, have there been any statements made by Indian organizations, especially Hindu Indian organizations?
That I'm aware of. Of course, I'm not very well connected with the organizations here in the US. There are a few organizations, the Fiocana and others, but I'm yet to hear any statement. Probably they would have. I would not say nobody would have done it, but I'm just not aware of that. That could be my ignorance.
Yes, this is something of concern because, as you know, the Muslim community is constantly asked to condemn when extremists amongst us take stances and conduct violence or call for violence. And the Muslim community complies. There's actually a database out there of how many times the Muslim community has spoken up against violence and extremism. But there seems to be a silence from the Hindu American community on this, especially for people who are using their religion and spreading this message.
I would agree totally with you. And then the challenge really, is on the organizations back in India, where we have thousands of education institutes where bright students pass out and then migrate to America and the Western countries seeking a better future. But unfortunately, they don't seem to be sufficiently open to understand what is happening back in India, or if they do understand, do not seem to have the courage to speak up. This is something that we really need to work very hard at back in India. I don't think this is something that we can do here. And I remember talking to Fiacono to last month and telling them this challenge is before us. It's up to us to redeem the soul of India. Already when the young people are there in our institutions studying for a future for themselves, not only think of their own future, but think of what they can do for through human solidarity. This is something that we urgently need to work for.
One final last question before we let you go. Taking you back to your time when you were a young priest in India and working for Mother Teresa's charity, can you share some of those moments, that the good work that was done, and now that this news has made it into corporate media and we're seeing the likes of NBC and CNN covering Hindutva and the impacts of Hindutva on India. This hasn't happened for a very long time, and it took for them to attack this charity. So can you tell us what more about your time with that charity and why there's such a global outrage now because of this action taken against them?
Well, let me go back a little bit to what is happening in India. The FCRA was definitely brought to ensure that things that the government doesn't like is not promoted by the civil society in India. This is a definite intent. But this didn't happen with this government alone. Way back when UPA, that's a Congress alliance, was in power, they were very keen that no civil society voices were heard against the neoliberal economy that was put in place during the time of the UPA. And therefore, you will find a control of all NGOs receiving funds and speaking up and speaking to power already during the time of the UPA, the Congress government. But that time, it was more against the socialist nature of our country. So the attack on the socialist fabric of the Indian constitution began despite the fact that it did bring a lot of empowering, enabling legislations into vogue during the time of the UPA. So the socialist fabric had been under attack during that time and moving towards capitalist economy. Now we have both being done. The secular fabric is also being torn asunder by this government. And therefore, earlier, those who are being targeted are the ones who are working on human rights and human protection and promotion and the interests of the poor. Now it is also philanthropy, where philanthropy is seen as somehow bringing a good name to the Christian and the Muslim minorities. And therefore, this added, attack, the two-pronged attack, both on the socialist and the secular fabric of India. And that is why now, despite what has happened, despite the global uproar that could have come from an act like this, the government is empowered, or they go almost as bullheaded against philanthropic organizations from minorities, Muslims and Christians, who are working for the poorest of the poor. Probably they think that the Indian government thinks that because of the huge middle class which is there, the class that can buy into products made across, who form a huge market in India, is so huge, the countries probably will not act against that, and therefore that gives them the confidence to do the things that they are doing now. But the missionaries' charity will continue to work, and I think the people from India itself will come forward, just as you saw the Odisha government telling the chief minister Naveen Patnaik, who was saying to all the districts collectors in Odisha to ensure that the work of the charity continues. And I think people of goodwill, they will redeem the soul of India. And Mother Teresa's organization will continue to succor to those most needed. There's 22,000 people, hungry, sick, homeless, orphans, are now being protected and served by the organization, by the society. And that will definitely continue.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been good to be with you.
That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Muslim Network TV wishes you all a very happy New Year. Assalamu alaikum and good night.